Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Chronic diseases are undeniably on the rise. Considering medical advancements, why is this the case? What are we missing? Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you around the world on the X Zone TV channel, xztv.ca. Joining us this hour to hopefully shed some light on the issue of rising chronic illness is Dr. Michelle Gamble. Dr. Gamble is the co-founder and director of ITAV Ministries and Sankofa Healing and Enrichment. She's the author of Creating a Happier, Healthy You, educator, mentor, and speaker who specializes in assisting persons with chronic illnesses to transform their health. Dr. Gamble has been a professional educator for over 25 years and a healthcare provider for over 20. She has a bachelor's in mathematics and English with an emphasis on secondary school education, a master's and doctorate in naturology. Dr. Gamble is a board-certified alternative healthcare provider with advanced training and certification in various areas of health. Her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Gamble, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you for inviting me to share with your community.
This is just such an important topic. You know, we're kind of getting sicker instead of better, it seems like to me, but then that could be just me. I understand you're not a medical doctor, are you?
No, I am not a medical doctor, so I do not diagnose, treat, cure disease. But I am, in the spirit of what it actually means to be a doctor, which is to be an educator. And I think, unfortunately, we've kind of lost sight of that first primary responsibility of doctors. And now medical doctors are not really in the game of educating, which is what the word doctor actually means, to educate, to pull out of,
So your bio states you have a master's and a doctorate in naturology. What is naturology?
Well, naturology is actually the study of nature's cures. Several years ago, I initially thought that I was going to go down the route of being a medical provider. And I started out actually in terms of taking courses in nursing. And then I quickly realized that none of this stuff really agrees with me in terms of what I felt the health and healing journey needed to be. Subsequently, when I decided to go the path of becoming a provider, I started to explore what the different options were. This is before the age of functional medicine and things of that nature. And at that time, there were several schools that were focused on exactly that, nature's cures. Unfortunately, the majority of those schools are no longer in existence. But the other thing that I had to consider was that in terms of looking at helping people to heal, I wanted a program that looked not only at the physical, but also the mental, emotional, and spiritual. And the only school that I could find that did all of that was American Institute of Holistic Theology. And they had a program in naturology, which, as I said, is no longer available.
That's regrettable. So you're a board-certified alternative healthcare provider. Tell us a little about that.
So when it comes to looking at certification programs, there are different organizations that will look over your schooling and life experiences and things of that nature. And then they have a board that reviews your application. So my application was submitted to the American, it's been so long, the Association for Alternative Providers. And that was the board that approved my ability to be board certified in the area of helping people in alternative pathways.
So, what is a holistic healing doctor?
Well, I guess if you ask that question to 5 people, you'll get 5 different answers. So I have to, you know, put this in terms of what I define a holistic healing doctor is, which is someone who helps people to progress on their healing journey mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. What I share with people all the time is that a holistic practitioner, a holistic provider, is one who looks at the entire person, one who recognizes that the healing journey is not simply a matter of managing symptoms. It's really about helping that individual to go within and to access his or her own ability to heal. In fact, all healing comes from the individual and his or her relationship with his or her divine creator. And so when we look at the word holistic, it's about becoming whole. And the only way that we can become whole is to address not only the physical, but also mental, emotional, and spiritual. You know, we live in a world where to speak about God is like blasphemy. No one wants to talk about the fact that we didn't just arrive on the scene, the fact that we are wonderfully, divinely designed, created beings. And from my perspective, that divine design is awesome. It is I'm always amazed. You know, I've been doing this for several decades, and I can honestly say that I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly in amazement of how God has designed us to heal. You know, it is the default mode for all human beings to heal. And unfortunately, when healing does not occur, it's because of interventions, which for a large part is man interventions, which create all forms of disease processes.
So, tell me a little bit more about the interventions you're talking about.
So, the first and primary intervention is establishing a relationship with the person that I'm working with. And that preliminary relationship building is one of exploration. You know, when we look at the traditional healthcare model that we have in our country, a medical provider, if you're lucky, spends about 15 minutes with each patient. And a lot of that is due to insurance paradigm, you know, but a lot of it is also because that's how they're trained. Whereas
It
my
wasn't. It wasn't always that way, though. I mean, I remember
absolutely
back
not.
when it wasn't all
Yeah,
that long ago. You go into your doctor; they took as long as it took to figure out what was going on.
exactly. And, you know, I have to take my hats off to our medical providers because I will say, like you are implying, that they didn't go into this pathway thinking that that is what they were going to end up doing. But unfortunately, because we don't have medical providers that are independent anymore, most medical providers today work for a hospital or work within the plan of the insurance paradigm. And so they don't have the ability to say, well, you know what, I'm going to take an hour to talk to Michelle. They have to go along with the guidance of the insurance paradigm. And the insurance paradigm says, you know what, we're paying you for 15 minutes and that's it. So when we look at, again, going back to your previous question, what are the interventions that we do? The first intervention is to give that person the understanding that, you know what, I'm here for you. And we're going to take our time in understanding what brought you to my office, what brought you to this conversation with me. So after there's that establishment of connection, of relationship, there now proceeds an investigation. I say it's like being a health detective, being a Sherlock Holmes. So the individual shares with me various symptomology, and my question is always, how, why, when, where? You know, like we learned back in elementary school, the W's and the H, but the biggest ones are why. Why? No matter what someone says, the next question is, why is this happening? Not what is happening. That's the realm, like I said, of the medical diagnoses. What is happening? And they give you a label, what I call medical hexing, and then they send you on your merry little way with a prescription pad. My question is always why? And to help that individual to go back further and further and further until he or she can identify something or a series of things that have been done that they have the ability to change. You know, it doesn't matter what the symptom is. There is always something that we as individuals have done that we can change, that can lead or support the healing process. And that is where it becomes absolutely phenomenal. And I am truly blessed to be able to be in that space of trust with the people that I work with, where they trust me enough to share some of the deepest and darkest aspects of their lives with me, because it is in those areas that we a lot of times don't want to traverse in. That is where the secrets to healing are. So to give an example, if someone comes in and says, you know what, Michelle, I went to my doctor and my doctor says that I'm diabetic. My blood glucose levels are, say, 150 or maybe 200 or 300. Now, for a medical provider, it becomes a what? What is this? The answer is diabetes. And then they say, okay, how can we get that blood glucose to come down? We can use things like insulin, metformin. That's not where I come in. Where I come in is saying, why? So I say, Susie, we're going to explore why this blood glucose is going high. And that exploration can lead down to rabbit holes, primarily, first and foremost, of looking at dietary things. But in addition to that, asking Susie, hey, how much sleep are you getting? Are you stressed out? Perhaps there is a chronic infection that is going on. Perhaps you're dealing with certain issues of a non-helpful relationship with foods, or perhaps the stress that you're experiencing with your family, with your work, is leading you to eat certain ways, or leading you to not eat healthily, where you're, not eating a good breakfast, not eating a good lunch, and all you're doing is jumping from one snack machine to another snack machine. There's
Well,
so many different things.
We're going to have to take a snack break here. It's time for it's time for a station break. Dr. Gamble and
Absolutely.
I will return very shortly, so please don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
The end has come, the night has fallen.
Whom doth our illness serve? With us this hour is Dr. Michelle Gamble, the author of Creating a Happier, Healthier You. Her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Gamble, in some of your material, you have said they don't want you to heal. They don't want you well. So who is they, and what do you mean by that?
Well, first and foremost, it's actually, I guess you can say, a trick question. And the reason why I put that, or I phrase it in that way, is because we live in a society where we are overwhelmed with a victim paradigm, a victim mentality, where we think that whatever is happening in our world that isn't the way that we want it to be is because of someone else. And there's a huge conspiracy. When we look at health, it is very easy for us to go down the rabbit hole of saying, you know what, it's big pharma's fault, or it's big agriculture fault, or it's the big food industry fault, or it is the fault of the medical providers. And I am just so excited because what I share with people is that, you know what? It's not about looking for fault or blame. It's about looking at the reality that, unlike every other creature on the face of this planet, we have the ability to choose. We have the ability to say, you know what? There are several options that are available to me, and I choose X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C.
Well,
And
I would argue with that a little bit in that, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere and I watch wild animals all the time, and they do choose. They choose what they're going to eat. They choose where they're going to be. They choose when they're going to drink, and they tend to thrive pretty well with those choices. So I guess I don't understand what you mean by they don't choose.
meaning that animals are designed with nature, with instinct. And for the most part, unless they're living in a domesticated world, they will choose based on what God has designed them to choose. So a squirrel will choose to go out there and eat a nut because that is what God has designed a squirrel to eat. And it's not that a squirrel is thinking, "Oh, the nuts are going to make me healthy, so let me choose the nut," as opposed to choosing this stone that's on the ground.
Well,
Whereas,
I would say that, weren't we designed that way originally as well? And if so, what happened to our ability to use our intuition, not our intuition, just our instincts, we have them, to eat what's right.
well,
The
that's the thing.
things we're eating right now, it's like, whoa, that's scary.
Yeah, it is scary. And that's because, for the most part, our instincts have been hijacked since birth.
Oh, do tell me how.
Think about how many babies come into this world and are allowed to go the pathway of instinct. A baby's instinct is to nuzzle on the breast of its mother and to drink the milk from its mother. That is the instinct of a baby. Unfortunately, many of our babies, if not most of our babies, have that instinct thwarted with the bottle
Yeah,
instead of
Dr.
breast milk.
Dr. Spock should have been shot on sight. A lot of the stuff started in the 50s, didn't it?
Well, it started in the 50s, and there are lots of different reasons for that. And then, as I said, so that primary instinct is thwarted. Another primary instinct that we have is to go to sleep when the sun goes down. But guess what? We have been taught by the people surrounding us that we stay up. So we stay up as long as there is light, meaning as long as there's a TV on, as long as there is the light that is in the building. So we no longer find ourselves adhering to the natural rhythms and the instinctual patterns of our ancestors because we're constantly being bombarded with alternative pathways. Those
Okay.
pathways weren't available to our ancestors.
So are you saying that the modern way of life is interfering with our instincts?
Absolutely. So much so that most people are out of touch with their instincts. So earlier you asked me, what are some of the interventions that we do? One of the interventions is to make people aware of those messages from within and to look at those messages not as villains, but actually the messengers of God. So what do I mean by that? When you're tired, most people say, there's something wrong with me being tired. And so I need to fix this. I'm going to take some caffeine or energy drink or something of that nature, instead of saying, what is this fatigue telling me? Well, hello, maybe it's telling you first and foremost, you need to go get some rest. The same thing like drinking water. Most people are so out of touch with their body's needs for water that they do not drink. They may drink some soda occasionally, maybe some coffee, maybe some tea occasionally, but they are so out of touch with their body's need for water. And so when I first start working with someone and I tell them to start reintroducing water, after a couple of days, they'll come back to me and say, you know what, Michelle? I find that I'm getting thirsty. And it's like, voila, aha, we have awakened those instinctual patterns once again.
So do we have to be careful about, the source of our water, right? It seems like there's everything has been altered. It's not in its natural form. We have chlorine and fluoride, and what do you recommend there?
Oh, you are so absolutely correct. I mean, it is a shame that something as basic as water has become so embedded with toxicity. One of the most inexpensive, easily accessible alternatives that I suggest to people is to go to their local Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart, whatever it is, and get a carbon filtration system. So that is your least expensive option that will at least take out some of the heavy metals, without breaking your budget. Now, of course, if you have the budget, then we can get fancier and fancier and fancier with regards to different types of filtration systems. But at the very least, I mean, if nothing else, do like a little Brita, one of those little pitchers that has the carbon filter. Is it the best filtration system? Absolutely not. But it is definitely better than nothing. And the reason why I say to go down that pathway as opposed to buying gobs and gobs of water in water bottles, Now, do I drink water in a water bottle if I'm out on the road and I don't have anything else? Absolutely, because you know what? I need some water as opposed to no water. But I caution people against the use of water coming in these water bottles, especially the ones that have very, very soft plastics, because the plastics get leached into the water bottles. You have no idea of how long those water bottles have been in warehouses, on the road, in hot climates that increase the leaching of these plastics into the water, which are endocrine disruptors, hormonal disruptors that contribute to the hormonal dysregulation that we're seeing in our many females, first and foremost, but also in our males.
So what about glyphosates? I mean, they've become a major problem. And does the filtration system get that out of the water?
There are certain filtration systems that do get that out of the water. You would definitely have to do the research to make sure that the filtration system that you are looking at is able to do that. And, glyphosates have become so ubiquitous, meaning that they're practically everywhere at this point in time, that one of the things that I emphasize with people is twofold. Number one, trying your best to reduce the more extreme carriers of the glyphosate, so you can look at certain websites or apps called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, which means that these are foods that are identified as being the highest concentration in pesticides and glyphosate, and to minimize your exposure to those things. So those types of foods include things like strawberries and grapes and apples and things of that nature. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is to optimize your detoxification pathways, optimize the functioning of your liver. Because if you are doing those two things, then, as the saying goes, by the grace of God, so shall we, move forward. I would love to live in a perfect world where there is no glyphosate, but at this point in time, I don't even know if that's possible anymore. And so we approach it from those two different standpoints, minimizing it as much as possible and optimizing our detoxification pathways as much as possible.
But again, we live in an extremely toxic environment, and a lot of the toxins we're kind of unaware of. The
That is
spraying that
true.
goes on,
That
we
is
don't
true.
know in the neighbor's yard,
That
et
is
cetera,
true.
et cetera. And isn't that putting our liver and detoxification system under undue stress?
Absolutely. And that's why, as I said, it's very important that we, number one, look for the signs of a distressed liver. And number two, that we are constantly supporting the detoxification pathways of our body, especially if we recognize that we are more susceptible to having difficulty optimizing the various phases of liver detoxification.
So, what are the signs of a liver in trouble?
Well, some of the signs of a liver in trouble, you have your more extreme signs, such as jaundice, meaning a yellowing of the skin, or yellowing of the sclera, meaning the white parts of the eye. Other times that you will notice that there's a problem with liver detoxification is how can I put it? People become more reactive to everything, more reactive to different, like walking down the aisle in the grocery store, and you're going down the detergent aisle, and you notice that your body is extremely intolerant of those scents. So you become much more hyper aware of toxic elements such as that. You know, Also looking at sometimes when people are experiencing extreme levels of fatigue, that can be due to an excessive burden on the liver pathways. Looking also at um, fat accumulation, because as you start to compromise the liver's ability and the gallbladder's ability, then you start to have symptoms like the sluggishness of the bowel. And a lot of times it's interesting because I was just speaking with a family member about this who has been taking certain supplements for years to help to have more regular bowel movements. And what I
Well, we're,
said
go-
to this,
we're I'm sorry, we're going to have to pick up on this on the other side of a station break.
okay.
Dr. Gamble and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. Macaina, 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 Maca, carry me home.
Is your design divine? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing medical alternatives is Dr. Michelle Gamble. Her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Gamble, you speak of divine design. Let's back up a little bit and say, what is that exactly?
Divine design is an awareness that we have been divinely designed to heal. That is the default design of our body, mind, heart, and spirit. What do I mean by that? It means simply that when there is an injury, the first mission of your body, mind, heart, and spirit is to heal. It looks for resources in order to facilitate the healing process. Now, we can see this most plainly. When you were growing up, you more than likely had a cut at some point in time. And all you did was clean out the cut. And guess what? In a couple of days, that cut healed on your finger, on your arm, on your leg, wherever it was.
And here all
This,
the time, I thought it was my Mickey Mouse Band-Aid.
I know you thought it had superpowers, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, but it is amazing how the body is, like you say, designed to regenerate, to heal, and it's if you've gone through the death process with someone, the body hangs on for a long time against all odds. What have we done that has interfered with that so badly that we aren't healing?
Well, because in addition to the body, what wants to heal also is the mind, the heart, and the spirit. But we interfere with an alternative programming. So physically, we interfere with an alternative program, meaning that we don't provide the body with the foods, the nutrients that gives it the building blocks to be able to heal. Mentally, we don't provide our minds with the thoughts patterns, with the ideas, with the understandings and the beliefs that it can heal. Spiritually, we deny the reality that we are connected to a creator, we are connected to our world, we are connected to each other. And so we see ourselves as separate. And in seeing ourselves as separate, we are not able to heal effectively. So a lot of times when we look at the divine design, what I say to people first and foremost is let us explore ways that we are perhaps unconsciously sabotaging the divine design. What are the things that we are believing? What are the emotions that we are holding on to? What are the lifestyle patterns? What are the foods that we are um, taking into our bodies that are not in alignment with the mission to heal?
Now, you've mentioned again divine and God quite a bit. Um, does a person have to? What about an atheist? Does a person have to believe in divinity and God in order to heal?
Well, the reality is no, because as you and I both know, it doesn't make a difference if an atheist cuts his hand or if a believer cuts her hand. You're divinely programmed to heal. The question becomes, are you swimming upstream against the current or are you going in alignment with the current? So if you choose to divorce yourself from certain understandings, it makes it more difficult to recover from certain types of abuses, from certain types of derailments, so to speak. And that is where, again, the understanding of the spiritual and the mental, emotional come into being. Because as you believe, so shall it be. If you believe that you can't heal, if you believe that your ability to move forward in your health journey is limited to only the things that you do in and of yourself, that no one else can contribute, me saying a prayer for you, me holding your hand, me hugging you, that is not going to have any impact, then you're sending out energy that is going contrary to the flow, the natural flow. Now, the question becomes, which one is stronger? Which one has more energy behind it? And that will lead to what the outcomes will be, what the net outcome will be.
Would you mind telling us what you mean by spiritual?
What I mean by spiritual is an understanding that we are not islands, meaning that my experience in this world is not limited to just me, myself, and I. That my experiences in this world include and are connected to the experiences of other people, of communities, the country, the world, and all that has been, all that is, all that will be, and to have an understanding that not only are we all connected, but we are all created to be on this journey together. And that creation was intentional. It wasn't haphazard. It wasn't a fluke. It was very intentional.
Well, that sounds almost more like a mental construct.
Well, it's a mental construct and a spiritual construct because a spiritual construct has the understanding that there are many things that exist in our world that are far beyond the rationalizations of the human mind.
So is it more to deal with the energetic aspects that we don't see?
Well, there are certain people who do see. So the energetic aspects are underlying everything in our reality. And then there are other aspects of reality that move even beyond, quote unquote, the energy that we can see and that some people are not able to see.
At this point, a lot of us are, well behind the power curve. I mean, we've been brought up for generations, um, doing okay in certain regards, and now I think we've modernized ourselves into a corner. So when you find you're dealing with someone that's, on a lot of drugs, has a terrible diet, is really down, right? No exercise, and they're really beat down, on all levels. How do you start walking them out? I mean, you can't just take them off the drugs and change their diet overnight. What's the walk out look like?
Slowly and surely, like a tortoise. What I say to people, it's not about trying to do 50 things at one time. I find that that is the best way to ensure failure. What I have found has been most successful is, number one, helping that person to identify his or her why, meaning, why is this important to you? Why do you want to do this at this point in time? Because most of us have been engaging in certain lifestyles, certain food patterns for decades, and we've been fine in our minds, like, oh, I'm not changing anything. But when people come to me, there's something inside of them that is saying, you know what? I need to change. And so what I do with them first and foremost is say, why are you here? What has changed? Why do you feel a need to change here and now? And then the next thing is to look at helping them to identify what is the most important thing that you think you need to change. Because it's not important what Michelle says you need to change. Now, I may present to you certain options, and I may present to you what I think will have the biggest, quote unquote, bang for your buck. But at the end of the day, you have to decide for yourself what you think is most important for you to change. And then we look at, okay, what is the lowest hanging fruit? What is the most accessible thing for me to do with respect to that area of change that will lead to my success? I'll give you an example. There was one woman that I was working with several years ago. She came to me and we looked at the lab work and we saw certain markers that indicated that she was extremely dehydrated. And when I had a conversation with her, she said, you know what, Michelle, I never drink water. All I drink is Coke and coffee. I said, okay. I said, let's do this. Do you think you can take 1 tablespoon of water each day? And she said, I think I can do that much. I can't drink a glass of water, Michelle, because I would just throw up. I said, okay, that's fine. Let's take 1 tablespoon of water. And she did that for a couple of days. And then it increased to a couple of tablespoons. And then she felt, you know what, Michelle, I'm starting to experience, that I'm thirsty. So I said, hey, let's try a glass of water a day.
So why do we lose our thirst, when we're so dehydrated?
We lose our thirst because we're no longer listening to our body. And so our body says, there's no point giving her this signal. She's not going to listen anymore. So, it's all good. I have other messages that I need to give her instead.
How much is related to addictions? Let's face it, we have all sorts of addictions, food addictions.
Well, we do. We do have a lot of addictions. And, that is something that we look at not only in terms of the addiction, but more importantly, why. In our country, one of the things that frustrates me a lot is that we talk about, quote unquote, going after the drug cartels and, we're going to get rid of the fentanyl dealers, and maybe we're going to go down and shoot them up in Mexico, or have trade embargoes against China. What I always wonder is, when are we going to start to ask the question, why are people getting addicted in the first place? What is it that is missing, or what do they perceive is missing from their lives, that they are seeking a thrill or an escape found in the form of some kind of drug? And that is where you truly start to go down that journey of helping an individual to reconnect with him or herself, to reconnect with his or her purpose, to reconnect with his or her divine design. And until you do so, simply bombing up all the drug cartels is not going to make any difference, because the individual will just seek a thrill in some other form, in some other drug or some other activity that is there to give them that thrill, or to um, eliminate their awareness
Well,
of that feeling.
it's that time again. We're going to take another station break. Please stay with
Okay.
us as Dr. Gamble and I continue to explore healthcare alternatives. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Brilliant feathers of an unearthly hue glide by on the edge of his dream. A whisper of touch, an unheard song. Rose bird takes flight, prompted by his broken heart. Fly high, sweet Phoenix.
Aren't we built to last? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Michelle Gamble. Her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. Dr. Gamble, there's been a lot of talk lately and, scientific studies indicating that we inherit a lot more through the DNA than what was originally thought. And then they go into epigenetics and all this fun stuff. But, now they're finding that trauma is passed down through the family line, so that a person can be carrying trauma that, they've not experienced, but it was in their DNA. Does the same hold true for addictions and tendencies towards not taking care of ourselves, or tendencies towards illness, or tendencies towards not being able to hear our promptings as to what's our what's good for us to eat and that sort of thing?
Huh? I tell you, you asked the age-old question of nature versus nurture, and I don't know if we'll ever come to an agreement about which one is more impactful than the other. What I can say is that the beauty of, quote unquote, the divine design is understanding that regardless of where you started, that does not dictate that that is where you have to end. You always have the ability to transform the different areas of your life. What do I
If
mean by
we
that? Go
if
ahead.
we transform the different areas of our life in our lifetime,
Mhm.
is that going to possibly reverse the pass down of the DNA damage?
Absolutely. In fact, that was one of the main themes of my first book, Mommy, Birthing the Goddess Within for Our Children's Sake. That understanding of working on the trauma patterns in our lives so that we don't pass down those patterns to others. That is one of the reasons why our nonprofit organization, It Takes a Village Ministry, is actually creating a healing sanctuary for the military women and their children, in order to help these families to be able to stop passing down the legacy of trauma, to be able to teach not only themselves, but also their children ways of working through life experiences without holding on to the emotional anchors of the past. Trauma is not simply the experience, the adverse experience that someone may have. Trauma is the relationship that we have to those experiences. And unfortunately, many times we maintain those relationships, those anchor holdings to the events of the past instead of allowing ourselves to break free from those patterns, allowing ourselves to step into a new pathway of generating and sustaining new behaviors, new thought patterns, new belief systems that will help us to heal and help our subsequent generations to become more resilient.
So what happens if we are, and most of us are to some degree or another, anchored into past trauma, and what happens to our health in the present moment if we're anchored into past trauma?
Well, as the ACEs studies have shown us, if we allow ourselves to maintain that anchoring with past trauma, it will, and it probably already has, affected our physical health and well-being. The ACEs studies show that individuals, now the ACEs, is adverse childhood experiences. It's a study that was done, and it's based on a little quiz that has 10 questions that asks things such as, when you were growing up, did you experience situations that threatened your well-being, like abuse, whether it be verbal or physical or a combination of the two? So it has those types of questions. And what they've found is that when you have people who answer affirmatively to 4 or more of those 10 questions, there is a tendency of increasing the risk of chronic illnesses, such as diabetes, hypertension, and things of that nature. And there are a lot of different reasons for that happening. So what we look at is, okay, you may have had those experiences in your past, but now how do we create or should I say, how do we increase the resiliency score? Because the other testing that should be done in companionship with the ACEs is what's called a resilience quiz. And a resilience quiz asks questions such as, when you had that experience, was there someone that you were able to talk to? Was there someone that you trusted? So it gives you a series of questions that speak to whether or not you had the environment to be able to buffer the poison from those adverse events. So the same is true if you are now an adult or a teenager or whatever it is, where you can acknowledge that that is the anchoring of the past. You now have the ability, with some assistance, to build those resilience quotients so that you can, number one, break away from that anchoring, and number two, create the strength and the fortitude to move through life and not recreate that same trauma pattern.
That seems to be the real ticket right there, because we do tend to recreate it, don't we?
Absolutely. If we don't have the adequate resilience behavioral patterns or the support mechanisms, then we absolutely do recreate those same trauma patterns. Because again, it's not about the event, it's about the relationship, it's about the behavioral patterns that we create with regards to those types of events.
So let's change gears just a little bit. What is nature's supremacy?
Nature's supremacy is understanding that above all, nature takes the cake. What does that mean? When I work with someone, I say to them, you know what? This is what Michelle thinks based on my experiences. But guess what? Nothing means anything if your body responds in a different manner. So I can say to someone, you know what? I think that you would really benefit from taking some milk thistle because milk thistle has been known to be very nourishing to the liver and to help subsequently with detoxification. Now, if that person consumes some milk thistle tea and says, "Oh, Michelle, after I drank that tea, I just felt nauseous." Michelle says, "Well, you know what? We're going to listen to what nature is saying, because for some reason, and we may have to do a little bit more detective work, milk thistle is not agreeing with you. And so we are going to say that nature is supreme. If nature says yay, we go for it. If not, we don't." And the
So
other
are there
thing, go
are
ahead.
there are there any studies following nature's supremacy and approaching it that prove that this works?
Well, I don't know if it's a matter of studies in terms of, your double blind placebo studies. And in many respects, to me, it's irrelevant. What's important is what is beneficial to the individual. There's no reason for me to say to that individual, "Oh, well, the studies say that, milk thistle is going to be optimal for your liver," if that person is throwing up when they're drinking the milk thistle tea. Again, bunk the studies, because guess what? Studies are aggregated on populations that may or may not be properly conducted, the studies. And then the other reality is that every person, like we said from the very beginning, is divinely designed. Everyone is unique. There are no two people that are exactly identical. No two people, even your identical, so-called identical twins, they are not identical. And so it would be folly to take on a different religion and believe that just because the science says X, Y, and Z, that we should have that be supreme as opposed to an individual's experience.
So in short, there are no studies that support this approach.
I wouldn't say that there are no studies. What I would say is that centuries of cultures around the world have had this approach of recognizing that nature is supreme, that we adhere first and foremost to what nature is dictating. Centuries. When you look at ancient Chinese culture, when you look at ancient Indian culture, even when we look at ancient European cultures, there has always been a reverence for the patterns of nature. When we look at herbology, when we look at homeopathy, these are all predicated on understanding that nature rules and that we adhere to the certain rules of nature, just like gravity. We don't have to have a study on gravity to know that if I jump out of a building that's 10 stories tall, I'm probably not going to make it to the bottom and be able to walk away. I don't need a study. I know that this is true because it's an observable reality.
So we're about out of time in the show, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Dr. Gamble, what's your mission?
My mission is to give people the tools, the resources, and the support that they need to be able to heal themselves.
And how do you find those? How do you find those for each person? Because you say everybody's different. So how do you find those tools?
First and foremost, with a conversation. It's a beautiful journey, as I said, that I have been honored and blessed to partake in that journey with hundreds of people at this point in time. And it's a journey that we take together. It's an exploration that we take together, that we put within the context of understanding the phenomenal contributions of science, and to realize that a lot of the healing process is exploring the journey of the individual.
Hmm. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. Gamble, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me once again. Greatly appreciated being able to share with your community.
It's been a real pleasure. Our guest
Absolutely.
this our guest this hour has been Dr. Michelle Gamble, the author of Mommy, Birthing the Goddess Within, For Our Children's Sake, and Creating a Happier, Healthier You. To find out more about Dr. Gamble, where you can find her books and all she has to offer, visit her website, theholistichealingdoctor.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please, be sure to join us again right here on the X-Zone TV channel, xztv.ca, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.